Good evening. I'm Sue Jenick. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Dane County. Welcome to our webinar on media disinformation, what it is, why it matters, what we can do about it. And of course, this is a very timely topic at this point in our history. We're seeing disinformation from too many sources. I want to start with thanking those who made this webinar possible. First of all, our program director, Marty Stamper, our moderator, Carol Kobe, our three speakers who Carol will be introducing, our Zoom hosts, Ann Lacey, our speaker coordinators. I'm not going to read all the names, you can read them. Our resource guide editor, Helen Gunn, several writers who helped write the resource guide, and that is available on our website, lwvdanecounty.org. It has a lot more detailed information about this topic. The advisors that we had helping us, we have a webinar audience question facilitator, that's Rebecca Dene, and several people have helped us with technical assistance. So thanks to everyone who's worked on this. As I said earlier, this forum, all of our forums are open to the public. You don't have to be a member to participate or even to volunteer with us, but we'd love you to become a member if you're not already. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan and political. What that means is we take positions on important issues, but we do not support or oppose candidates or parties. As most of you know, we inform voters about important issues and we help register them. But there's much more that we do, especially these days. We participate in protests, we have postcard parties, we have sign making parties, we have a program committee that puts on educational information like this webinar. One of the things that we're doing right now is our weekend democracy extravaganza, and that's taking place at Cargo Coffee on East Washington from 8 to 11 a.m. Saturday and Sunday this weekend. And what we're doing there is asking people to complete sticky notes with their answer to the question, what does democracy mean to you? We also have buttons, we have stickers, we have bookmarks, and it's a lot of fun, and we encourage you to join us. Some other upcoming events. We have what we call our no RSVP lunch. What that means is you just show up. You don't have to register. If you have time, you show up for the lunch. Our next one is tomorrow at noon at Ollie's in Fitchburg, and it's an opportunity to just hang out with members. Or if you are wondering if you should join and you want to meet people, you're welcome to join with us. On March 19th, we're having our Spring into Democracy fundraiser, which will be at the East Side Club. And our keynote speaker is Lydia McComas, who is the new Madison City Clerk. And then in April, we'll be putting on a forum on what unites and what divides rural and urban communities. We're co-sponsoring a webinar with the Lacrosse League of Women Voters, and that webinar will be on the environmental impacts of data centers, another very timely issue right now. So if you want to learn about that, we encourage you to join that webinar. And again, it is open to the public. If you want to join with us and do some volunteer work, we encourage you to do that. We register voters. We're out in the public talking to people about the issues that are important to them. And there are many benefits for people who are involved with volunteering. And probably the biggest one is you get to serve your community. You feel like you're contributing. And I know at this point, a lot of people want to be able to do something meaningful. This is one way to do it. Right now, we are in our nominations process. We have a number of open board positions. If you would like to nominate yourself or someone else for the board, you can contact Barb Feeney, and her email is there, and I believe somebody will be putting that in the chat. So if you're interested in that, or you can look at our website, it'll be on there as well. We have a survey of our members, and this one is just for members, where we ask them what they want us to do next year. Our fiscal year ends in July or June 30th. So our next year will start right after that, July 1st, 2026, and we make our plans for the coming fiscal year. So we're asking our members which topics they would like to see us address in forums like this. And we encourage everyone who's a member to complete that. And when we get the results, then the program committee will decide. Finally, we have elections coming up this year, as I'm sure you know. The first one will be February 17th, and that in Dane County, there's a circuit court branch one judge position and also some supervisory districts that will be on the primary. April 7th is an overall election, and that will cover a position for the state Supreme Court. August 11th is a partisan primary for the very many different positions, and November 3rd is the general election. So if you have any questions about whether you're eligible to vote, whether you have registered to vote, how you can get an absentee ballot if you're worried about showing up at the polls, you can go to My Vote Wisconsin, and there you can get all of the information that you need. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our program director, Marty Stamper, who will present our land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you. The League formation began more than a century ago in 1920 with women's suffrage, but nearly 2 centuries ago, even prior to the 1848 creation of the state of Wisconsin. In 1832, a treaty tried to force the Ho-Chunk to secede their territory of Treetop, 4 Lakes. Both federal and state governments repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Truth and acknowledgement are a critical part of building mutual trust and respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We continue this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. In Dane County, we are all standing on the stolen ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together today. The League of Women Voters is grateful for the past, present, and future guidance of Wisconsin's Native nations. Thank you. And now it is my honor to turn the program over to our tonight's monitor and our member, Carol Colby. She has an extensive career in communication field, including executive producer and host of a long-running radio program and moderator of a cable television program. We're grateful that she is honoring us tonight by moderating this webinar. Thank you. Carol, it's on you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marty. And I also want to welcome our virtual audience to the League of Women Voters of Dane County's Public Forum, which is a webinar tonight on media disinformation, why it matters, and what to do about it. I'm Carol Colby and am privileged to be moderating tonight's forum on this critical topic. As Marty mentioned, in addition to being a League of Women Voters member, I do have a professional background in broadcast journalism. However, when I first began my career in television news in Milwaukee many decades ago, the major media outlets people turned to were local broadcast stations, local print newspapers, the three major television networks, and national newspapers, also in print. That is no longer the case today. With the advancement of technology and other factors, the options for information are spread across a vast array of choices and social platforms, which offer increasing opportunities for media disinformation to flourish. Why does this matter? And if it does, what can we do about it? Those are the basic questions our three outstanding expert speakers will address. Our first speaker is Michael Wagner, the William T. Evu Distinguished Chair for the Wisconsin Idea at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he is a professor of journalism and mass communication and the director of the Center for Communication and Civic Renewal. Mike studies how people's use of the information ecology affects what they believe is true, what they want from their government, and how they participate in political and civic activities. He is widely published and is the winner of 5 university-wide teaching awards. Mike has also worked in the field as a former news reporter. He has received public service awards for community talks and research-based op-eds he has written to share the Wisconsin idea. And what a great place to begin tonight, with the Wisconsin idea, which adheres to the basic principle that education should influence people's lives beyond the classroom to the boundaries of the state and beyond. That is what this forum is designed to hopefully achieve. Welcome, Michael Wagner.
Well, thank you very much, Carol, and thanks to Sue and everyone at the League for the invitation to be here this evening. I'm delighted to have a chance to share some of what we have discovered over the years with you and to hear from the other two panelists who are both terrific, and then to have a discussion all together. I was asked to talk a little bit about why we should care, like the why it matters of disinformation, and then also asked to talk about different kinds of mis and disinformation and how they manifest themselves before turning it over to Professor Kim to talk more about the information ecosystem and all of the things that she's discovered about that in recent years. And so to get started, I want to say that misinformation is very costly. Um, in both blood and treasure, as people like to say. Just as one example, studies from Johns Hopkins University, the University of Pennsylvania, our own group at UW-Madison, and the University of Washington concluded that people believing things that were not true about the COVID-19 virus from the time the pandemic began until early 2023 likely resulted in over 300,000 unnecessary deaths and cost the country hundreds of millions of dollars per day. It also fostered a decreased trust in our scientists and in our political institutions, as well as decreased trust in each other, based upon whether people would get a vaccine, wear a mask, support schools being reopened or not, all of these different kinds of things. And so misinformation and beliefs in it can be very costly. They can also lead to violence. False claims about the veracity of the 2020 presidential election fueled the events of January 6th. A lot of these false claims spread on political party Facebook pages in states like our own, and in a research article led by a UW sociology graduate student named Sadie Dempsey. It was discovered that county party political pages sharing things that were not true helped foster the idea that people should organize and go to Washington, D.C. on the 6th of January in 2020. If we take a step back, all of what I'm about to talk about, and I'll define mis and disinformation in just a moment, all of this comes in an environment that's very right in line with what Carol was saying a few moments ago. It used to be that we got our information from local newspapers and television news, and the choice wasn't enormous when it came to watching the news. If you were in Madison, Wisconsin at 5:30 p.m., the news was on all three channels from the 60s, 70s, and 80s until cable television developed and started to change things. And you can see that over that period of time, the trust Americans have in news has diminished significantly. At the same time, the figure in the top right is an average ideological position of members of the United States Congress from the founding of the country until a couple of years ago. The red line is the more conservative party, the blue line, the more liberal one. So it's from 1860 forward, Democrats and Republicans. And you can see that Democrats and Republicans are further apart now than they were even during the time of the Civil War. So we have decreasing trust in the news, more polarization amongst our elected officials, and that decreased trust in news, as you can see in the figure on the bottom right, is partially driven by our partisanship, which we often, interpret through the lens of what it is our leaders are saying. So this is the backdrop of the conversation we want to have today. When it comes to mis and disinformation, we can think about a game of telephone. It might take place in person, it might take place online, where a message is proffered and then that message changes over the course of time. Sometimes people honestly share things that are not true. They thought they heard a term or thought they heard something and share it, and that we would consider misinformation. Whereas if someone chooses to lie on purpose, we would call that disinformation. More directly, disinformation is intentional. It's designed to mislead, deceive, or cause harm. It's often political, and it often builds upon attitudes people have related to race, inequality, gender, and other social factors. Misinformation might be sharing that exact same information that is not true, but it is done without the malicious intent. And so it's not quite it's not as intentional as disinformation spread. So if I know something isn't true and say so, and then people see that on my Facebook page and think, well, gosh, that's a professor of mass communication, it must be true, and then they share it, I've contributed to disinformation, and they have shared misinformation, even though it's the same message. There are 7 different kinds of mis and disinformation, and I was asked to talk about how we can think about these and what they are. And so one is satire, right? There's not an intention to cause harm here, but people can be fooled by satire. The Onion, which started in Madison, Wisconsin, is a fake news or a humorous news source that satirizes politics and the news and social life. But sometimes people share those stories in The Onion as though because they think they are true when in fact they are not. Misleading content takes information that's true, but uses it to frame something in a way that isn't quite consistent with that information. Imposter content is when someone impersonates a genuine source. Fabricated content is just made up. A false connection is when the promise of the headline or the information in the visual is not consistent with what's in the actual content of the claim. False context is when genuine content is shared with false information to go along with it. And manipulated content is when genuine information or imagery is manipulated to try and deceive us. So let's look at some examples of these. When it comes to things that are misleading, in October 2024, President Trump claimed that 85% of people, then he was candidate Trump, I guess former President Trump at that time, claimed that 85% of those who were diagnosed with COVID-19 wore masks. The study we think he was referring to said it was 71%, not 85%, and also noted that it was people who did not always wear masks, but people who sometimes did. And so if you're not wearing the mask all the time, you become more likely to infect yourself. And so the claim is misleading And it also didn't, the study didn't compare to people who didn't wear masks at all or to those who only wore masks occasionally. So the claim itself had a kernel of truth, but was misleading. Other mis and disinformation is imposter content. This looks like it is coming from ABC News, but it is not. If you have eagle eyes or reading glasses, you can see that the URL at the top of this is abcnews-us.com, which is not ABC News's website. This other group has made a website to look like ABC News and then puts up fake information pretending to be ABC News. Other kinds of content can be fabricated. As an example, there was a thing going around online a while ago that claimed that Chelsea Clinton, the daughter of Bill and Hillary Clinton, claimed that the Pizzagate conspiracy theory was actually true. The Pizzagate conspiracy theory was one where it was alleged falsely that Democrats were running a child sex ring out of a pizzeria basement in Washington, D.C. And a man actually showed up to that pizzeria with a weapon to free the children who were not there because the claim wasn't true. And then later, there was a fabrication that Chelsea Clinton said, no, it really was true, when in fact she did not say that. And so this is an example of fabrication, just making things up and sharing them. Another kind of mis and disinformation is called a false connection. A false connection you can see in this headline where it says sugar as addictive as cocaine and heroin, studies suggest. Now, the headline makes a false connection because it's making us think that sugar is going to be addictive to us as human beings in the way that heroin and cocaine is addictive to human beings. The study was only done in rats and has not been replicated in humans. And so while sugar isn't great for us, it is not, has, or at least has not been demonstrated to be as addictive as cocaine and heroin. And so this kind of mis and disinformation makes a false connection. It takes something that's true, sugar is that addictive to rats, and then extrapolates it and makes a connection to something else. Another example of mis and disinformation is using what's called a false context. And so here you see a photo and text that went viral on social media and has actually seen a little bit of a new life as the situation in Minneapolis with ICE has gone on over the last few weeks. And you see here the text that says, breaking, Trump sending Border Patrol agents to forcibly separate immigrant children from their families. Now, that is true. The President of the United States has used Border Patrol agents to separate immigrant children from their families, and that even happened in the past few days in Minneapolis. The false context is this photograph. We see two heavily armed individuals and a very frightened child in this photograph. It's a real picture. The picture has not been doctored at all, but it's using a false context. The false context here is that this picture is from the year 2000. When Bill Clinton, Democrat, was president, he and his attorney general agreed to use United States forces to remove a child named Elian Gonzalez from the United States. So that child is Elian Gonzalez, who was from Cuba and had made it to the United States. And there was this long, protracted discussion in the public and among the corridors of power about what to do with this child. And eventually, the federal government raided the home where he was staying and extracted him and sent him back to Cuba. So the claim in this is true, but the photo is not a photo about the claim. Other kinds of content are manipulated content. So here you see on the left a picture of Russian leader Vladimir Putin pulling on then President Obama's tie. And this photo was widely circulated with commentary saying that, you know, the Russian president is controlling the US president. He's pulling him towards him in a move of deft power and manipulation. But in fact, what was manipulated was the photograph. The photograph on the right is the actual photograph that ran in newspapers across the country. Putin is just standing there, with his hand just above his waist. President Obama is speaking to him, but his tie is safely tucked into his suit jacket and not being pulled by the Russian president. In the era of AI, we're seeing more and more of this kind of content. When we've graduated from manipulated content of photographs and audio to manipulated content of video as well, that's becoming of higher and higher quality and more difficult for us as citizens to sift through and try and figure out what claims are true, what claims aren't, and even what video we're seeing is real and what video is not. Beyond mis and disinformation, we can also think about rumors. Rumors spread just as wildly as mis and disinformation do online and also amongst people who get together and talk with each other. And an example of a rumor would be that there is this dossier of Donald Trump, and that's related to information the Russians have about Trump. This has not been independently verified to the satisfaction of researchers who study mis and disinformation. There may be a dossier, but what is in it is not certain, and the claims that are in it have not been, or many of the claims in it have not been demonstrated to be true in a verifiable and transparent way. And so there are rumors that these things exist, but that's not the same thing as mis and disinformation. It's spreading a rumor, which is actually even probably harder for news organizations to get a handle on, because when they report things like unconfirmed reports or some people are saying this is true or this thing happened, um, it is not always it's not always presented in a way where we as the audience interpret it as something that isn't for sure, right? If we're seeing it on the news, we think that it needs to be independently verified and be verifiably and transparently accurate. And when news organizations, especially cable news organizations or digital organizations, spread rumors, even if they say they're rumors, it makes it harder for many of us to figure out what it is that's true. And all of this matters because the things that are false, whether it's misinformation or disinformation, or the things that are unconfirmed because they are rumors, are claims that spread way more quickly than things that are true. The truth tends, isn't always, but tends to be more mundane. It tends to be less emotional and less fantastical, and so it's less likely to get shared on social media. And it's less likely to work its way through the information ecosystem at a fast pace in the way that things that aren't true or aren't yet verified are. And I think that's a nice place to stop and turn it over to Professor Kim when so she can give her presentation about the information ecosystem and all of the other things we have to worry about in this contemporary information environment. So thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of the presentations and our conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael. You certainly have given us a lot to think about. Our next speaker will move from living in the world of disinformation to what are the changes in the media landscape that impact disinformation. Young-Mi Kim is a Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and a faculty affiliate in the Department of Political Science. Young-Mi's recent research, Project Data, empirically investigates the sponsors, content, and targets of digital political campaigns across multiple backgrounds. Young-Mi was among the first to discover Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election, including Russian operations targeted voter suppression campaigns. She testified at the Federal Election Commission's hearings on the rulemaking of international or internet communication disclaimers and presented congressional briefings on election interference on social media. Her research on Russian election interference was cited by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Young-Mi spoke at the European Parliament about her research on data-driven political advertising and inequality in political involvement. Welcome, Young-Mi Kim, and what an expansive background. you do bring to this discussion. So I turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you for the great introduction. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm going to share some of my own research, but also just like a broadly talk about like a disinformation campaigns in the 21st century information environment. I was asked to talk about some changing information environment and then its like implications for disinformation. The learning objectives of this part of the talk have been circulated already, I believe. So I just want to remind you that I'll talk about three things. Like a first one is like a changing information environment, and then second one is disinformation campaigns or campaigns to strategic adaptation to the changing information environment, and then resilience strategies we should take it. The first part is about like a changing media environment. How the new communication technologies or new information technologies like fundamentally change the information environment. When we talk about new information technologies or new media, people tend to think about AI or all different like individual technologies, social media, like Facebook, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, Instagram, or like a text messaging, like a WhatsApp, things like that. But instead of focusing on like AI or technology, individual technologies themselves, we want to look at our media landscape as a whole, our information environment as a whole, and then want to identify a fundamental shift or fundamental changes in the 21st century information environment by comparing it with the pre-digital era or the broadcast era. Well, Kara and Mike already talked about like some of the changes like in the information ecosystem. So I'm gonna keep it short. So recall how we watch like a television in 70s, 80s, or even 90s. Usually like families like sit together and watch news together. And in fact, like our neighbors' families, like they are probably watching the same news. Perhaps like every household like share the public, share the same messages, the same news. So we have like a shared public sphere, and then everyone has like equal chance of like exposed to the same messages. But imagine now you open your phone and then look at your social media feed, like a Facebook feed or TikTok, and you can cross-check with your neighbor or your friends and then see what they are getting. You quickly realize that like, the feeds are very different. The other day I went to a restaurant and then I saw a couple like sitting at the same table, but they're looking at like her own phone, and man was looking serious while woman was like giggling. So they are looking at like a different clips on their own phone, even though like they are sitting at the same table. So we seems to be like technically connected through network, yet like personally disconnected from one another. The whole information ecosystem is very fragmented with the proliferation of like media outlets, and then consumption is individualized, and then this is actually person by person like information environment. So this is not just about the social media or phone, but the entire information system. Think about like a search engine, recommendation, email, like a text, and AI, like a ChatGPT. You consume your own media because the message is only targets you. So I identify the fundamental shift as like the shift in the unit of the audience. So the unit of the audience targeting, more broadly speaking, the fundamental shift in the unit of the audience targeting, media placement, and then messaging. That has shifted from an arbitrary group. You can think about like a broadcast era. We have media market. This is like a truly arbitrary, like arbitrarily defined like market, like defined by like a Nielsen, the TV rating companies. And then just like based on the population size, it doesn't overlap with the state, doesn't overlap with the congressional district, nothing. Nielsen just to divide the whole country like, into 210, sometimes 209 media markets. And then that is the basis like for the unit, like a unit of audience. But now the unit of audience has changes to on individual. So the audience is, is a individual, on individual. It is not a plural. So this is because it's possible because of like a data-driven micro-targeting. And an algorithm. So with the big data, companies or any like even like a low resource like organizations like can like use like a built-in like a product predictive model provided by social media, and then use an algorithm or keywords, and then identify like an exact like a person, theoretically each and every person in the United States with the different messages. So as you can see the picture here, everyone consumes like a different messages. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that imply like, for disinformation? So here, like I define disinformation as information that has the function of misleading. So it's a slightly different than what Mike Wagner, Professor Wagner, like introduced earlier. That is like what Mike Wagner like explained is like the most common definition. But as like an empirical social scientist, like it is really hard to identify the intent like behind like information. Russian election interference is a good example. They all like pretend to be like Americans. So the organizations they use their own names are like Americans for Americans, kind of like non-distinguishable. But it sounds like a real, authentic like grassroots organization or nonprofits or candidate campaigns even. And it's a covered coordination. It is invisible. So it's really hard to know who are doing this, and then what's the motivation like behind it. So defining like disinformation more broadly as the function of a misleading, following like a Fowler's like a definition, the function cannot be reliably identified at the level of an isolated messages or a piece of like an individual piece of information. So whether misinformation has the function of misleading is rarely evident from a single statement taken in isolation. It becomes visible only when messages are examined as a part of a broader patterns of coordination, repetition, or strategic deployment over time. So for this reason, I use the term like a campaigns, a coordinated, deliberately like a coordinated effort of a communicative actions, as like a disinformation when I refer to like a disinformation. So I just use it here like a disinformation campaigns, and then starting like a campaigns of more broadly like a political campaigns or influence campaigns. How campaigns like strategically adapted to the 21st century information environment. While the information environment has been evolving, campaigns also learned hard that persuasion is really, really difficult to achieve. So decades of research and practices in political campaigns, for example, show that the broad persuasion is increasingly ineffective. Conversion, like for example, like a defect, like from like a one party to the others, like persuading like Democrats and then to vote for a Republican candidate, rarely happens. And disengaged like people, we always think that like campaigns are all about like mobilizing people who are not interested in politics, or moderate like to persuade like for the one side. But disengaged people all drop out entirely from political scene because of the, there's like a Marcus Pryor like argued that in this like a highly polarized and fragmented media environment, they all just like opt for entertainment. Then only like a most like a extreme like a people remain like in like a political information environment. So it's really hard to chase like a disengage the people, and then so campaigns are happening like focusing on reinforcement. So consolidating like their own bases. But in this highly polarized like environment, political environment, reinforcement is not enough like to win the election, for example. So there you go. Like here is like where I get disinformation campaigns come into play. Earlier I said like at the same time that the 21st century information environment has shifted fundamentally from arbitrary group-based communication to individualized like exposure, and disinformation campaigns emerge as a strategic adaptation to this environment. Rather than seeking persuasion, they operate through three interrelated mechanisms. Confusion, so by exploiting like a fragmented media ecosystem in which inconsistent and low credibility information overwhelms like a sense making. And then division, sowing division and then distrust by leveraging like ideological segregation and echo chambers in the information system to deepen social and political fractures. And then most normatively consequential, I think, especially in the election context, is coalition breaking and demobilization, which is achieved through like a micro-targeting that selectively discourage like a subsegment of the voting age population from like a voting. So in this way, disinformation campaigns do not aim to convince everyone, but to differentially disrupt, fragment, suppress, and undermine collective democratic action. Let me give you an example. So take a look at this. This is a Facebook ad by a group self-identified as like a grassroots organizations for Black people. So power to people, we have to grow now, we have to wise up, we don't have any other choice this time, but boycott the election. So this is like, they are boycott the election, like that's the theme. The time we choose between the two racist, no one represents Black people, don't go to vote, only this time we can change the way of things. So this is like the election boycott campaign. And then this was like later turned out to be like a Russian ad, Russian part of like Russian election interference campaigns. And then my research project, like my research team, like developed some ad tracking and reverse engineering tool to track these kinds of ad on digital space, and then capture the ad and associated meta information, like where it came from, and then we also measure like people's like direct exposure to such ads, and then reverse engineer like targeting profiles. So and then we found so many ads like this all run by unidentifiable groups, like groups who never report their this kind of like a campaign activities to Federal Election Commission. So the question is, do they effectively target the non-white voters? Like by looking at the content, it looks like they are targeting African Americans. Does the exposure to such as actually influence like an actual voter turnout? So I'll just give a focus on like a study as a case because I think it illustrates the nature of like a disinformation in the 21st century like very well, especially like a coalition breaking demobilization. So in fact, like this study was just published yesterday. So what a great opportunity to share the findings. So it's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science of the United States and co-authored with my colleagues at the UW Medicine and Penn State University. We tracked like 10,441 individuals representing the U.S. voting age population. We directly measure like a digital ad exposure at the individual levels, like each of like 10,441 people's like exposure are captured and measured. We tracked like each of these individuals like a turnout record, like a voting turnout history, and then linked this to investigate like whether like, voter suppression ad exposure, like the ads that I just show you, act, between the voter suppression ad exposure and then actual voter turnout. And then what we found is that there was a clear geo-racial targeting. When we saw like the ads, yeah, it looks like it targeted African Americans, but we all like doubt that well, is it really like it doesn't look like a sophisticated. So are they like really able to target like a non-white voters? And in fact, they surgically target like non-white voters in racially minority majority counties in battleground states. You can think of it as a Milwaukee counties in Wisconsin. Um, and then these people like received the digital voter suppression ads disproportionately more than their counterparts. In fact, like there's like nearly they received like 10 times more voter suppression ads compared to white voters in white majority counties in non-battleground states. And then my friend, like when I first discovered this, I could talk to my friend, like, oh my God, like this is what I found. And then my friend said, well, like it's they're probably low income, low educated. Yeah, we looked at that factor, we controlled for the factors. Education, income levels, like it didn't seem to matter. So it's a clear geo-racial targeting here. And it in fact like it looks like a decrease like a voter turnout. So we compare the groups that were exposed to digital voter suppression ads and those who were never exposed to voter suppression ads. And then the differences in voter turnout rates between these two groups were 1.9%. So this is like a complicated statistical causal inferences. So I'm gonna skip all the details, but I'm happy to talk about more if you have questions. But the digital voter suppression likely decreased the voter turnout by on average 1.9% across the population, which is equivalent to like a 4.7 million fewer votes. And if we look at the targeted segment of the population, the non-white voters in minority majority counties in battleground states, their turnout rate was like a 14.2% lower than their full counterparts, white voters in white counties, white majority counties in the non-battleground states. I want to note that in 2016, the non-white and the white voters like a turnout gap was like a 12%. Sorry, like yes, 12%, 12%. So that was actually like like the motivation of the study. I was like a little bit puzzled, like non-white voters like turnout rate was like even lower, uh, historically lower, and also even lower in battleground states where like a intensive like a mobilization efforts actually happen. So I think like this like a case like a illustrate like a disinformation campaigns are far from just presenting like a false information, but by nature they are anti-democratic, um, because the core democratic harm does not lie in just like a false information alone, but in how they are strategically designed to undermine the conditions necessary for democratic life, uh, like confusion, divisions, and then things like that, and then coalition breaking and demobilization. So let's move on to the third point, which I think is an overlap with the next speaker's like a topic. So I'll be very brief and then leave it like open uh, for discussion. But I just want to emphasize that the as we see based on like there's like a case studies, media literacy is not cannot be a blanket solution. Education was not a factor, and when like there is like a delivery like a coordinated like a disinformation campaigns, uh, it is the burden cannot be solely placed on citizens to detect and verify and resist disinformation on their own. So policy reforms are important that directly address like targeting practices, algorithmic transparency, and accountability in political communication infrastructure is most important. And then again, I have some ideas and suggestions for League of Women Voters members, but I leave it open for the sake of the time for now, but happy to discuss when we have like a Q&A. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Young Mi. My goodness, I'm nice to see that the League of Women Voters are a part of the strategies to look at the situation and the challenges of disinformation and confront them. And now that we have heard about the media disinformation world we are living in and the changes in the media landscape that impact disinformation, what can we do about it? What steps should we take to be more effective media consumers? Our final speaker will give us some direction on how we can best move forward. Martin Alvarado is the Community Engagement Librarian for Business and Technology at the Madison Public Library. Along with his colleagues in the reference department, he assists people daily in resolving their information needs by ensuring privacy, helping evaluate information sources, and providing access to a wide range of ideas. Martin also assists community members in improving their understanding of the online environment. This includes supporting the development of basic skills, providing practical tips on navigating content, and helping understand the larger context in which information exists. Welcome, Martin Alvarado. And I have to say, in the midst of relating your extensive background, the words that you provide practical tips caught my attention. We're all eager to hear about how you can help us become more effective media consumers. Thank you for being.
Thank you, Carol, and it's just an honor to be here. Also, an honor to follow the great interventions by Mike and Young Mi, and I will just jump into right away because I have a lot to cover, and like a good librarian, I will provide a lot of sources, but it'll be things that we can go back to because these resources will be available as part of the materials for attending this event. So. What can we do to identify and manage disinformation? And just a really quick graphic here at the beginning. This was from a WHO report, World Health Organization. when they were talking about how information was spreading during the COVID pandemic. And it shows how, apart from being consumers of information, we're now also nodes and conduits for information, and our individual behavior can have cascading effects. And they have a few examples as to people's different information behavior helping falsehoods not make it through and not be amplified. And so I'll be looking at a pretty ambitious agenda for the time that I have allotted. But again, this is with the idea that you will be able to go back and explore all the links and resources that are part of this presentation. So the first one, I think one of the things is a lot of times we want to know where a media outlet is situated according to different criteria. And also we might want to look at different sources of media that we're maybe not familiar. There's one called the Ad Fontes Media Bias Chart, which I think is one of the more interesting because it allows you to navigate both where an outlet might be on the political spectrum, and they make an assessment as to what the reliability or the practices for accuracy are for those. So that's a really fun one to explore. There's also the All Sides media bias chart, and that only looks at where they believe these outlets are ideologically. And they have a disclaimer: we don't rate accuracy or credibility because we're not a ministry of truth. A publication can be accurate yet still biased. So I think just to take with a grain of salt that even these people who are examining the bias likely or definitely have their own bias. So these are three ways at really looking at, if you wanted to look at information sources, not all of them are going to be here. Also, Wikipedia is a good one because it might have more of a narrative as to what has transpired with a media organization, if it's had any scandals or controversies. So these are all good ways of looking at different media and where they are coming from. And to jump into kind of like I really enjoyed looking at the great systems level perspective of both professors. And what we do at the library is that we deal with the information behavior of people at the very direct human level. So I'm going to talk about two quick models of information use because that's what we study in library school. So the transmission model that maybe has to do a little bit more with the older broadcast ideas is that you have a message, you encode it, you send it. There might be some distortion in the way there, but then the receiver decodes it. And you think that pretty much the message goes, maybe with a little bit of distortion, but it assumes that there's a pretty straightforward process that has to do with transmission of the message and how it gets to the other side, where we have a brilliant scholar, Brenda Dervin, who recently passed away, who looks at the question of what strategies did the person use to figure out if that information was accurate, if they would accept it, or what did they do to reject it. So it has to do a lot with context. And this is brilliant because it was posited sometimes in the 1980s, kind of at the individual level of transactions, as Professor Derman would theorize that we would have a situation where we have our backgrounds and we have overarching context in our society, and then we have a gap caused by uncertainty or an unanswered question. We eventually are going to go into an outcome that might be positive or negative, but we're going to seek out information in that manner. And to be able to bridge that gap, this is where we gather ideas, where our feelings come into play, where our memories and other narratives come into play. And I think what's interesting about this is, for something that was proposed in the 80s, it really gets to the matter of how micro-targeting, as Professor Kim was putting out, can really be looking at all these different dimensions of our information-seeking behavior and be turned against, be used at a scale, be targeted or tailored individually to what these social media companies know about our background. So I find this just fascinating that this model is so relevant still. So just running through a bunch of resources that I want to show. This was put out by the European Parliament, and these are really nice bite-sized videos that can give you a really good look at a couple of the different things that can happen. So we talked about emotions, and that's been one of the discussions as to how misinformation spreads. So it talks about how there's a polarization by only letting the more extreme points of view on the platforms and then sort of like vacating the middle ground. So there's not really much common ground for debate. The part of flooding the information space where, especially with AI, content can be produced at such a scale and spread so quickly. And I was talking with someone who works in political consulting, and that person was telling me that the other side was using a lot of these tools and putting them out. And what was their side doing? Well, doing the same. And apparently it was working to counteract. So I think we're seeing this sort of like hyper acceleration of political operations that are opposed to each other, just putting in more content. And flooding the information space has the idea of creating that uncertainty that Professor Kim was talking about, where we can't, and also Professor Wagner, where we can't really distinguish the truth because there's just so much stuff happening. There's also content that can be tailored to our biases and can be sent to ourselves directly because there's that level of information of what we seek out on the internet. There's also the part of presenting things out of context. So a lot of the worst malinformation, misinformation, disinformation has to do with putting a kernel of truth and then skewing it in such a direction that factually it might be correct, that one thing, and maybe there's a couple other things that are added, and then it just becomes a toxic piece of information. And then there's also the part that more authoritarian regimes can do with silencing critical voices. So this is really interesting. It only takes a few moments, and it's a really good uh, introduction to these concepts, and I found it very useful. So the other thing to talk about is if we're thinking about the editorial process that we had in that we still have in journalistic outfits. We have editors who look over the copy that a reporter might or a writer might provide. We also have fact-checking departments in some of them, even though some organizations like the Washington Post got rid of theirs. So we have these traditions of journalism that are looking and sometimes um, looking to have a certain standard, a certain amount of veracity in what is presented, but we can also see what the individual behavior is of people, which is a lot of people are turning to news influencers. And this was a couple of really interesting studies and charts by the Pew Research Center. So apparently 20% of us regularly gets news from news influencers, but if we look at adults under 30, that is almost double the proportion, or about 40%. So I think we want to think that we're in a different era, not only in the way that things are broadcast, but in how we think who is the valid person who can deliver the news to us. So here you can see a couple of the different reasons that people flock to news influencers. So a lot of it has to do with interpretation. It's much more friendly to have someone who has a conversational manner or who might look like you or you might associate with to let you know what's happening, but they don't have necessarily a fact-checking department or any editorial review or any other thing. There's also the part of authenticity. So we're looking for authenticity in this world of technological isolation, and that's another big factor, and matching opinions or values. So we're also self-selecting to where we want to go, and feelings of connection. So we have all this human aspect to how we're looking for information behavior, and these may not be targeted at us directly, or the algorithm might feed these to us, but we are actively seeking people online who will provide us with trust or feel like we're making a connection with someone who's authentic, who can tell us about the state of the world. Another aspect of social media influencers is that a lot of the platforms, or all the platforms, have different degrees of policies with regard to political content. And there was this really interesting study out of India that I posted here, how social media influencers are scaling surrogate political campaigns in global majority elections. And there's a chart, this is only an excerpt, there's probably like another like 8 rows, that gives us an idea if we're on a certain platform, what criteria is that platform applying to the content that's being shared on that? And also looking at where the money's coming. So influencers are not required to disclose if they were paid to promote political content. They can slip it in conversationally. Maybe they might have a candidate or political operative. So it's even in a way kind of darker money because it happens at the individual transaction level. And also the way the platforms work. If this generates engagement or if it brings more eyes onto the the channel that influencer has, it also allows them to maybe monetize the content, monetize all the views that are that have happened due to whatever political activity they might be doing. So it also creates that incentive structure. So if we look at some of the benefits that political operations have, is that the influencer has already an online following, and also influencers are good at being able to distill things in a way that's very conversational that could go viral, and they are not bound by journalistic ethics necessarily. And also, unlike a lot of the broadcasts and things like that, we are able to access, or they are able to access, the digital analytics that have been collected on people who, or all of us who go on social media platforms. A few of us who don't, great for you. So, okay, so continuing this sort of breakneck pace, so looking a little bit at what's out there, the AI generated content is just the amount of realistic or even semi-realistic or slop that's being put out. And I think when we see that amount of slop, of low quality content, it really makes us want to disengage. It makes us want to not participate, and it also might be confusing and bewildering. And AI doesn't just produce images that may or may not be as realistic as this one of Spanish President Pedro Sanchez and Joe Biden. And the really, I think, hidden part of AI that we're not looking at when we think of generated content is that AI can produce text that can go on a website, but also more importantly, it can code entire websites with just a little bit of a seed of what's happening. And you can have something that would have taken maybe at least a couple days to go up if someone was working really hard, you can just fabricate an entire ecosystem of websites that can just create the sort of wraparound idea. And so I like the metaphor of the marketplace of ideas, where the best ideas would fight it out, and then eventually there could be an accepted version of the truth, or maybe whoever was able to throw their weight around would prevail, but there was a consensus created. And there's been commentators who talk now about the marketplace of realities, where you just shop around and you can find a information environment that just supports your biases and beliefs, and then really isolates you and can really take you away from the general consensus of what is real. So this was an interesting article. The New York Times does pretty good at fact checking a lot of things. They still do have a fact checker, which is great. And this was how the Times assessed that photo from Trump of Maduro in handcuffs. And they go through the process and how the photo editors are communicating, and what happened when they ran it through an AI detector, and the AI detector thought, oh, well, this may or may not be true. I think the takeaway from me was that they really more looked at the contextual clues within the pictures and deciding whether or not to make an editorial decision as to whether a photo was true, false, or newsworthy. And one interesting book that's come out recently called Fake, F-A-I-K, A Practical Guide to Living in a World of Deepfakes, Disinformation, and AI Deceptions by Peter Carpenter, is don't ask if something is real that you're seeing online. Ask, why does it exist, and what is it trying to portray? Who is putting it out and who could benefit? And using kind of our contextual knowledge about places, events, and people to figure out and better evaluate it than trying to find the technological solution, which that has its function, but I think a lot of it is, with the technology evolving as quickly as it is, it makes it difficult to keep up. And it's kind of an arms race between the people who fabricate content and those who detect it. So a very kind of like common approach that's being put out is the sift. So if you see online content, or if you're looking at sharing something, the idea that you can stop before hitting the share button. You can then investigate the source or find better coverage. So if you're looking for a particular claim that's happening, maybe you don't necessarily want to investigate the source. You might just want to verify if it appears in other media. And then if you really want to get to the bottom of something, you could look at trying to look at the original context, because the way we consume media online is just so fragmented, and it's just smidgens It's just whatever's been cropped to represent the particular point someone's trying to make. And so the stop part, do you know what the website or source is? And do you have a general sense about the claim? And I think very importantly is the content producing an emotional response, because that's one of the main things that people who are spreading misinformation or looking at online communications have gotten good at doing. And also, if you look at investigating the source, what is their expertise? And also, do they have an agenda? Like, are they part of a trade group that represents a certain industry? And what is my general sense of reliability? You can also look at some of the other charts as that we saw before to look at that aspect. And as I was saying, if you want to find coverage, you can see if that information is being presented in different contexts, if it's being shared broadly, which might validate if that something actually did occur. Is there a more complete version of what's happening? And then the part about seeing if we can trace things to the source, because then we can see, again, that part about sometimes the worst disinformation is the one that has a kernel of truth. If we can look at the original and its context, then that can be a good way of getting to the bottom of that. There are a couple of fact-checking websites, and these are from different parts. I'm not going to make any claims as to their accuracy, but they are here, and they're some of the most recognized one. The one that I want to call out for being a great resource is the Sunlight Foundation, because that is literally just looking at the government websites and seeing what's changing there. So it's a good transparency, and also kind of like reversing the whole tendency in 1984 where everything goes down the memory hole and the government is fabricating a new version of reality as we speak, which is a very Orwellian thing. But I think when we've seen what's happened in some of the government websites, it does ring quite true these days. So I think one of the things to think about these fact-checking websites is that although they might present factual information, they might push their interpretation of what the truth is or how the facts connect. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that they're not completely neutral arbiters. They usually have a way that they want to present the information that they're verifying. And just a couple more things. So one sort of policy, um, look at different policies and case studies put out by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is looking at different strategies for misinformation or countering disinformation that can be done from the media side, from the government side, and from the technology side. So once you get the materials from this presentation, you can look at that and explore all these interesting things. Lastly, since we are at the public library, and I encourage you who are not in the Madison area to get close to the local library. If you're in the South Central Library System, by all means, contact us directly. So your library will have books on uh, different topics: misinformation or disinformation, media literacy, and critical thinking. These are all links to our catalog. We also have access to electronic magazines and books that you can look at if you wanted to try out different publications to get more information. And you can always call your reference librarian with any question that you have, and we will do our best to try to find resources for you. And that's pretty much what I have.
Wow. I liked your last point because it all seems overwhelming and there's so many different things we can do and steps to follow, but call your public library and the reference desk. And that's something that even in my years, the dynamics of the changes in the media that I have always turned to, and it's been very valuable and something to be credible and depend upon. So thank you all so very much. That concludes our presentation by our three speakers. And what a comprehensive overview of media disinformation that we've had tonight. It's time now to move into the Q&A portion, and that's where we hear from you. One of the first questions that came in was regarding the viral content of myths or disinformation. Is it a bad idea to share what is correct broadly, or does that just extend delivering the disinformation or the misinformation?
As is so often the case, I think the answer is that it depends, and so a lot of research suggests that sharing things that are not true, and then correcting them, have some success, but not very scalable success at combating mis and disinformation. When people want to share things that are true, when they see somebody post on social media and they want to correct it, there are two strategies that seem to work pretty well. One of which is called the truth sandwich. So you begin your post by saying this thing is true, and here's my link to my source that how I know it's true. Then the meat of the sandwich is the false claim. So this claim is true. Here's the false claim, and then back with more evidence about why that claim was false and the other claim is true. And so surround the misinformation with evidence. That helps cue people into what psychologists call an accuracy motivation when they're hearing information rather than a directional motivation, just to believe, so for example, an accuracy motivation might be if you're watching the Super Bowl and since the Packers aren't playing, if there's a close play at the sideline, most Packer fans will just objectively look and say, oh, that receiver's feet were in bounds or they weren't. If it was a Packer player, they would want to conclude it was a catch because they would have a directional motivation for the Packers to be successful. And so cueing the truth twice increases an accuracy motivation. And then the second thing is called observed correction. So rather than me trying to correct you if I think you've said something that's wrong, making a more general statement that doesn't target the person but that other people see can be effective. So it probably isn't changing the mind of the person who posted the thing that's not true, but it might affect the preferences of those who see it in the information ecosystem and see that correction with the link to evidence, the kind of evidence Martin, was referencing, and Youngmi referenced briefly in her presentation as well.
If people are locked into believing the disinformation or misinformation that is within their world, I think you touched on that. It's very difficult to change their mind, even with the facts.
There are lots of cases where people interpret the world through their partisan lenses or the perspective of their own in group, whether that be a racial group or a gendered group or other kinds of groups that are important to people. And so, if facts were enough, we wouldn't be having all of these problems. But who decides what a fact is and how do we share it? And all of those things make this complicated.
And here's a question to all of you. And how many conglomerates control all media platforms? The influence of corporate ownerships, does that impact the media and the dissemination of disinformation or misinformation? What about corporate control and conglomerate leadership? Who would like to? I know, Mike, that you have said that you have some thoughts about that, and perhaps you can start here and the others might chime in.
Sure, happy to. I'll try to be brief. I know other folks have. I know there's lots of questions that fit expertise of others too. So I would say the chart I have to change the most in my teaching is the media ownership chart and all the connections between them because it changes so often. But there's really a handful of, and depending upon the year, between 6 and 10 companies that own an enormous percentage of the information that we see, whether it be news, sports, entertainment, all of the content that we see. And we see now um, big conversations about how questions of changing ownership affect what we see. We saw ABC's Jimmy Kimmel briefly taken off the air. We saw the end of Stephen Colbert show that will happen in May, both tied to decisions about potential changes in corporate ownership of the television networks that are part of these large conglomerates that also include streaming services and magazines and film studios and sports companies and gambling, all these different kinds of things, also tied in with newspapers and the rest. But between 6 and 12, depending upon the year and time, there's a large set of companies that own, or at least have a hand in a lot of the content we're exposed to.
Do they have more influence today than they used to?
I don't know the answer to that question. Hard to say.
Young Me, a couple of questions for you. Sources, what are the sources of voter suppression ads? Where are they coming from?
Yeah, so these ads are all run by undisclosed groups. So undisclosed group is actually like a legal term in campaign finance law. So those are the groups like who did not file did not file a report like to the Federal Election Commissions. Some of them are exempted, like some nonprofit organizations, and then they're elected like a PAC and did spend like on campaigns like more than 50% of their revenue, and then if they don't mention candidate names, like these are all there are some exemptions. The filing requirement like exemption, but these are all like a broadcasts era policies. So recently, I testified at the in front of like a Federal Election Commission back in 2018 and 2023, 2022, they finally had like the online advertising, political advertising policies. But like still, it's like the problem is like oversight is so difficult because these ads are not feasible. So short answer to that is that like yeah, we don't. These are the undisclosed groups. That doesn't necessarily mean that their identities are fake. Although like I know like a part of these groups are Russian disinformation campaigns, and then so they use like they pretend to be American grass organizations, which are all fake. Some organizations seem to be some loose kind of a Facebook group or community-based groups never filed a report to IRS or FEC. So the more important thing is like what they did as a whole, not like as like a seemingly random, independent, like undisclosed like campaigns, but undisclosed campaigns as a whole. What did they do? Is this targeted like a voter suppression, like a georacial targeting? I think that gives some sense of like who they might be.
All right. And then just picking up on that and expanding a little bit, because you did mention the candidate or PAC campaigns. Somebody asked, wanting more information about that. Are they have more rules, and how do they function? And in the whole world of advertising and what they're allowed to do.
After Citizens United, it's just a wild life. So anonymous campaigns can contribute like unlimited amount of money, and money is a speech. That argument to fly in. So there are some rules like if it is like express like advocacy, meaning that like as like a specifically use like a so-called like a magic aids, like like a vote for, vote against, those kind of support, then like it has like a lot more stricter rules, like a disclosure and filing requirement. But one thing I want to say is that unlike like a broadcast era, like a campaign message production takes like just a minute or a second on like a social media, for example, or with the AI, it's even more effective. Like you can like create like a thousands of messages like in few minutes. So you can context, so you don't use like a magic words in your ad, but as a comment or following message could refer back to the ad you just posted. Think about like a candidate. So I saw like some ad like there was like some candidate like advocating for like a the the embassy, like Israel embassy, and then think about it. The ad didn't use like any of the magic word. Vote for or vote against, like a support, like this explicit like a expression.
Because
But
that's
think
what
about, yeah, but I think about the candidate who would move the embassy, Israeli embassy. And then it's enough like because you just saw the ad that like who's gonna move like who proposed like to move the embassy uh 30 seconds ago. So you that is like a strong like it has a function of advocacy, but it doesn't. It's not like a subject of like express advocacy because it didn't use like a major word. So the law is the policies are behind this like a changing information environment. Yeah.
even if they don't say it, you use the word in your message about covert. The message comes across covertly in the
Right.
message.
Yeah. So that's why I said like it's really important to look at the patterns. Um, it's yeah.
Well, here's one that's really concerning. It should be to all of us. How can we navigate the environment of myths and disinformation that is leading to extreme violence and danger that incites people? What can we do about that? Are there rules? I mean, free speech is such a strong amendment, and the preservation of that is just critical to our democracy. But how do we counter, the violence and the extreme that are emerging from some of this communication? Martin, you were talking about your list of things to look at and ascertain.
And I think just because I've been a fan of listening to podcasts about disinformation, that I've really learned that algorithmically you can start looking at health information and then a few clicks down you're served like very radical content. And I think it's one of those things that happens organically that doesn't really necessarily have to do with free speech because there's no free speech in having an algorithm that'll steer you in a certain direction. So I think there's probably some to be done with having more transparency about the algorithms or having algorithms that don't go to the most scandalous and engaging content, because I know that that's one of the reasons people will, or one of the things in papers that I've read about radicalization have to do is just looking in an online environment and then sort of following the slope until you get into this whole other ecosystem that then sort of reinforces these things. I think also whatever we can do on our community level, I think that's going to be the hard work because there's not going to be overriding technical solutions, I think, for things, but how can we really, yeah, come up with ways of engaging our neighbors and people around us, just in the face of things that are happening right now, but just as a project where we try to humanize people around us because there's plenty of things that are dehumanizing us.
Yeah, I would just add that on
Can I?
average. Oh, go ahead, Rinyami. I'll wait for you. I'll go ahead.
Oh,
Go.
okay. So not like not the answer, but like something I could that I can tie back to so-called like a corporate like influences. So relatively speaking, hatred or violent content on those content like platforms have like a relatively like a explicit like policies like to regulate those things. The problem is though, it is like a scale, they're all like a scale business. And then if they think that it's just a few posts, uh, they don't care. They don't develop like an algorithm that demote uh, the violent content or hatred. Um, and then so it's we just really need to think about like the implication of this like a gigantic um, tech companies um, who are sort of like who are determining a lot of things, um, misinformation and then malinformation, and then there is like a not so much like a transparency. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, Mike, add something. Aubrey?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think those are great points. I would add that at the local level, you know, groups like this can encourage folks to show up and vote for candidates who reject violence. Politics is supposed to solve our problems without violence. And by encouraging people to vote for candidates who expressly reject violence, expressly reject those who regularly peddle in the sharing of things that aren't true and the claiming of things that aren't true for their own gains, are things that people can do. It's not terribly satisfying because when you vote, it's a very blunt instrument. You don't get to vote for a candidate and then write in, stop supporting violence and misinformation. You just are voting for a candidate and all of the things that they're going to do in office. But voting is the most consistent and most effective, in my view, instrument that we regularly have access to advance what it is we would prefer to happen.
Absolutely, and not having an apathetic community, as you mentioned, Martin, getting the community to be out there and positively space, uh, deciding and communicating that the vision of the society that they would like to have. So before we close, important question, particularly for the League of Women Voters, we can't close without asking, because you mentioned it, what can the League of Women Voters do to combat disinformation about voting?
So, building democratic resilience in the 21st century information environment, I think it requires like a deeper understanding of non-voting. So it's like a little bit like a shift from like a voter mobilization uh, from voter mobilization focus to uh, like a non-voting as an outcome of not an individual level problems, but structural information condition. So this is not like a simple individual disengagement or apathy, because like a disinformation campaigns actively and selectively identify vulnerable populations and exploit their distrust in this political system. I think that opens a critical space for organizations like League of Women Voters to rethink resilience strategies uh, as broader larger project of restoring trust, strengthening inclusive political coalitions, and addressing social conditions that lead people to non-voting or disengagement. Um, so I think that is not primarily about fact checking or source verification, but more about rebuilding the democratic infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Martin or Mike, do you have anything to add to this? This is our final question. What can the League of Women Voters do? They're doing a whole lot.
Well,
What
the
can
league
they?
is trusted, right? The league is trusted by lots of people because as we heard at the outset of the night, it's political but nonpartisan, right? And so the league can partner with news organizations to explain how people get on the ballot in a state, how votes are counted, and help people understand that, for example, the rules in Wisconsin are such that some ballots that are, turned in early can't be counted until election day. And so in really large cities, you get these big, kind of swaths of votes that kind of come in the middle of the night. And that's rife for a claim that someone's stealing the election. And under the cover of darkness, thousands of votes were cast. But if the league and news organizations and other voter advocacy groups and folks like, I know you're talking to Lydia McComas, the Dane County clerk, soon, or Madison's clerk, I forget which her job is. But anyway, by letting people know beforehand, this is what has to happen by law, it helps us not start to let conspiracies run away with us when we see things that look different um, in a highly stressful situation like an election night or something like that.
Right.
I would
Thank
add
you.
one more thing is I've always liked candidate answers, and I think what I've seen is one of the parties has stopped responding to them, but I think League of Women Voters continues to reach out, so please continue to reach out to them, and hopefully people will start engaging and we'll have like a more robust representation of different viewpoints and different parties in the guides.
That just came up on the chat as a suggestion to follow the candidate answers that the League of Women Voters does supply to the voters, to the community. So we are running over, but it has just been such a dynamic conversation, discussion from you. I want to thank the three of you, Michael Wagner, Youngmi Kim, and Martin Alvarado, for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening. And a special thank you also to the dedicated team of League of Women Voters who have worked behind the scenes to make this forum possible. If you would like to continue this conversation, please consider registering for the post-forum discussion, which will be held on Tuesday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. I also highly recommend reviewing the Media Disinformation Resource Guide for additional information. It is excellent, and it really follows what some of the comments by our speakers were made tonight. You can access both of these on the League of Women Voters Dane County's website. And to the League of Women Voters members, you are urged to take a few minutes to fill out that member program survey about the topics you would like the League to cover. This is available for a limited time only and does not obligate you to volunteer for a cast, but urges you to share your ideas. And stay tuned for information about the next forum webinar on the environmental impact of big data centers on February 11th at 6 p.m. And then the following one in April on what unites and divides rural and urban communities. A recording of tonight's webinar will be posted on the League of Women Voters Dane County website in about a week. And you are invited to review the program, refresh the content in your mind, and then share it with others. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Dane County, thank you, our webinar audience, for attending this forum tonight and for your thoughtful questions. Thomas Jefferson wrote that a well-informed electorate is a prerequisite to democracy. Your participation tonight contributed to that goal. The next elections in Wisconsin are posted on the screen. To find out what is on your ballot, go to myvote.wi.org. On the dates listed, take the knowledge you gained to the ballot box. The dates are February 17th, April 7th, August 11th, November 3rd. Because remember, it is there where your vote is your voice. Thank you again, everyone. This concludes tonight's forum. I'm Carol Colby, wishing you a good evening.